Hello and welcome to Wavescan, the international DX program from Adventist World Radio. I'm Jeff White. This program was researched and written in Indianapolis by Dr. Adrian Peterson and produced here in the studios of WRMI Shortwave in Miami this week. Our program outline for today, beginning with Focus on Asia, on the air shortwave from India's first capital city, Part 2, the Calcutta story. The beginnings of early shortwave broadcasting, and our Indian DX report. Wavescan presents Focus on Asia, a year-long series of reports about shortwave broadcasting and listening on the continent of Asia. You'll remember that Jose Jacob VU2JOS at Hyderabad in India alerted us a while back to the fact that the shortwave transmitter VUC in Calcutta is likely to close sometime soon, and that there is a distinct possibility that all of the other regional shortwave stations in India are likely to close in favor of DRM coverage. Because of this information, we began the long and fascinating story of radio broadcasting in Calcutta here in Wavescan 2 weeks back. Thus, in our program today, we pick up this story again, this time with the era of experimental broadcasting. It was back in the year 1923 that the Marconi Company in England exported a radio transmitter into India and installed it temporarily in Calcutta for the purpose of making a public demonstration of radio broadcasting. The initial test broadcasts consisted of music recordings, which were received at Chowring Lee, some 3 miles distant. Soon afterwards, another demonstration was staged, with this same transmitter installed in a newspaper office in Calcutta, and the receiver at the Kharagpur golf course, a distance of 72 miles. On this occasion, speech was transmitted, which was heard quite clearly at the receiver location. Then in November, this same transmitter was loaned to the newly formed Calcutta Radio Club, and they went on the air with experimental programming under the call sign 2BZ. This transmitter, rated with a power of 1/2 kilowatt, radiated on 800 meters, 375 kilohertz, in what we would now call the long-wave band. The call sign 2BZ followed the already accepted system in use in England, with a number followed by 2 letters. It is not known if there was any real significance in this call sign, unless perhaps the B may have stood for Bengal, the Indian province in which Calcutta is located. Somewhat simultaneously, another Marconi transmitter was made available to the West Bengal government. The ownership of this station is listed as the Indian States and Eastern Agency in Calcutta. This second transmitter was rated at 1.5 kilowatts. It radiated on 425 meters, 705 kilohertz, in what we now call the standard medium-wave broadcast band, and it was on the air under the call sign 5AF. The station is known to have been on the air in 1925, and probably somewhat earlier. It is not known if there was any significance to the actual call sign 5AF. Back on November 27, 1923, the manager of the BBC in London, Mr. J.C.W. Reith, made an entry in his diary stating, "I should like to organize Indian broadcasting from here." A little less than 4 years later, 1927, a regular radio broadcasting station was established in the city of Calcutta. In the initial stages, it was installed at the Calcutta High Court, with the studios in a tent and the transmitter in the Temple Chamber. This new radio broadcasting station was launched under the call sign 7CA, and it was on the air with a transmitter rated at 1.5 kilowatts on the medium wave channel 370.4 meters, or 810 kilohertz. The 2 letters in the call sign 7CA suggested, rather obviously, Calcutta. But why the 7? I guess we'll never know. At the time when this new government-owned radio station was inaugurated, the two previous experimental stations, 2BZ and 5AF, were closed, and we would suggest that the original 5AF transmitter was then taken over for use by the Indian Broadcasting Company as 7CA. Soon after station 7CA was launched, the equipment was transferred to a new location at 1 Garston Place in Calcutta. The first 2 floors were rented for a period of 5 years. A special inauguration ceremony was staged at this new location on August 26, 1927, and the British Governor of Bengal, Sir Stanley Jackson, took part in the ceremony. This ceremony was broadcast over 7CA, and it was heard quite widely by the few radio listeners who owned a radio receiver at the time, even as far as Rangoon in distant Burma. 2 years later, the 7CA medium wave transmitter was installed at Kasapur, apparently a new unit, and the call sign was regularized to the now familiar VUC. At the same time, a new radio magazine began publication under the title Betar Yagat. Around the time when the European War began, 1939, All India Radio Calcutta, VUC, took over the whole building at Garston Place for use as offices and studios, and new equipment was installed for a total of 6 studios. The first shortwave transmitter at VUC Calcutta was an experimental unit rated at just 700 watts, and this was installed, we would suggest, at Kasapur, coincided with the medium wave unit in mid-1932. The operating channel was 6110 kHz. Interestingly, as was the custom back then, amateur radio stations were known to relay the programming from a local medium wave station. Around the time when this first low-powered shortwave transmitter was inaugurated, amateur stations VU2CS and VU2FR were heard in the United States, carrying a relay from VUC Calcutta. Then, 3 years later, a 2-kilowatt transmitter on the same channel was installed, and this was supplemented 3 years later with a new 10-kilowatt shortwave transmitter from Philips in Holland, model KF-VH10. 2 new channels were chosen for this 10-kilowatt unit with the call sign VUC2, 4850 kHz and 9530 kHz, and the inauguration date was August 16, 1938. We leave the Calcutta story on this occasion in the middle of last century, with the intent of completing the information in another edition of Wavescan sometime soon. In the meantime, you might be interested to know that the Calcutta time zone at this stage was an awkward GMT plus 5 hours and 54 minutes.
You're listening to Wavescan from Adventist World Radio. Send your comments and reception reports to Wavescan, Box 29235, Indianapolis, Indiana, 46229 in the United States. That's Wavescan, Box 29235, Indianapolis, Indiana, 46229 in the USA. Or you can email us at wavescan@awr.org. Our email once again, wavescan@awr.org.
So, when did broadcasting on shortwave really begin? What really was the earliest history of shortwave broadcasting? The answer to these intriguing questions depends on how you look at the matter. However, let us provide an answer, as was given by W.J. Baker in his lengthy article, The Early History of the Marconi Company. Ray Robinson of KVOH takes up the story.
Thanks, Jeff. It was back in the year 1916, a time when Italy was at war in Europe, but on the English side, not the German, and the Italian Navy asked Marconi to provide a procedure for short-distance wireless communication. The Navy wanted short-range maritime communication between ships at sea and with coastal stations on the Italian peninsula, and at the same time with no over-the-horizon eavesdropping by enemy wireless installations. Marconi brought his fellow experimenter Charles Franklin with him to Italy, and together they developed apparatus for communication on the very short wavelength of 2 meters. They discovered that these transmissions gave good coverage over a short distance, and the beam signal could be focused in the desired direction, and over-the-horizon coverage was almost non-existent due to the line-of-sight nature of that wavelength. At the time, no valve was available, so the two men developed a spark circuit operating in compressed air. During the following year, Franklin conducted similar very shortwave experiments in the British Isles, first at Carnarvon in Wales, then at Inchkeith, Scotland, and also at Portsmouth on the south coast of England. Franklin continued his experiments after the end of World War I in 1918 with radio experimentation between London and Birmingham, using a longer wavelength of 15 meters or 20 megahertz. Successful coverage was obtained over the 97-mile distance between Hendon in London and Birmingham in the Midlands with just 700 watts input. Quite simultaneously, another Marconi employee, Captain H.J. Round, conducted similar shortwave experiments between Southwold on the North Sea coast of England and a coastal location in Holland on 100 meters, 3 megahertz. Similarly, these shortwave experiments also achieved good success. In addition, amateur radio operators in England and elsewhere, who were relegated to 200 meters, 1500 kilohertz and beyond, were achieving sometimes spectacular success in long-distance communication. As a result of these unexpected successes in long-distance communication on shortwave with relatively low power, Marconi asked Franklin to install a 12-kilowatt shortwave transmitter capable of 97 meters, 3 megahertz and beyond at their Poldhu station on the Cornwall coast. In the meantime, Marconi had bought a wartime ship, the Ravenska, which he renamed the Elettra, and he converted it into an experimental radio station. Test transmissions on shortwave from Poldhu began on April 11, 1923, and the Elettra picked these up as it voyaged south from Falmouth near Poldhu in Cornwall on the journey out into the Atlantic and down the coast of Africa. Good signals were heard down as far as the Cape Verde Islands in the central Atlantic, some 2,566 miles from Poldhu, even though the Poldhu output was only 1 kilowatt at the time. The Poldhu shortwave transmitter was rebuilt to 17 kilowatts, and successful tests were conducted with the ship Cedric all the way across the Atlantic to New York. These signals, now on 92 meters, 3260 kilohertz, were also heard quite clearly in Canada and at the AWA radio station in Pennant Hills near Sydney, Australia. Similar tests were carried out successfully direct with Australia on May 30th, 1924. In the new 2014 edition of the World Radio TV Handbook, you can also read an informative article by Boston's noted shortwave historian Jerome Berg on the history of shortwave broadcasting in a nutshell. In it, he describes what was happening during the same period at medium wave station KDKA in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Westinghouse radio pioneer Frank Conrad had been experimenting with shortwave coverage from his amateur radio station in his suburban home as early as 1920. Westinghouse inaugurated a medium wave station on the roof of their factory in East Pittsburgh on November 2, 1920, and less than 3 years later they began simulcasting their medium wave signal on a shortwave channel, and thus was born the new era of shortwave broadcasting.
Thank you very much, Ray. You're listening to Wavescan from Adventist World Radio. Now let's go to India. Here's Prithviraj Purkayastha with his 5th Sunday Indian DX report.
Hello friends, Namaskar and greetings from India. I am your host Prithviraj for this edition of Indian DX report. All India Radio Kohima station is again heard on 4850 kHz during Indian evening hours, that is around 12 to 15 or 15:30 UTC. This is a rare Indian station which is presently transmitting irregularly from the hilly province of Nagaland in northeast India. Good news for all BBC Hindi listeners in the subcontinent first of all. From 24th March they are broadcasting live program in all the 4 transmission slots, that is 0030 to 01 hour UTC, 0230 to 0300 UTC, 14 to 1430 UTC and 16 to 1630 UTC. For past few broadcast sessions, they were broadcasting recording program in the second and fourth slots. Voice of Russia is closing down all its shortwave broadcasts by 1st April 2014. After several online stories and predictions about this closure of shortwave service by Voice of Russia, last week I received this official response from Elena Osipova of Voice of Russia Letters Department, confirming this closure, leaving only online broadcast of this historic station, which will be available on http://voiceofrussia.com.
This is your program, Moscow Mailbag.
Hello, I'm Max Gorbachev.
And I'm Tatam Natsakanyan. Hello, everybody. So, what's on the agenda, Max?
Well, today we'll try to find out what the most common Russian surnames are. We will also talk about the history of telephone manufacturing in our country and say a few words about the UNESCO World Heritage Sites located in Russia.
Well, let's start with surnames or last names, Max. This question has been sent in by William Kerr from Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada. Greetings, William. Now, William wants to know, what are the most common Russian surnames?
A good question, William. If we conducted an opinion poll, I'm sure most Russians would say the common surnames in our country are Ivanov, Petrov, and Sidorov.
Yeah, these three names are like the phrase every Tom, Dick, and Harry in English. The first Russian names that come to mind, that is.
Stations are now announcing their A14 broadcast schedule, which will be valid through 30th March till 25th October 2015. Here are some important updates for listeners in South Asia. Deutsche Welle's only South Asian language broadcast in Urdu can be heard between 14:30 to 15 hour UTC on 15275, 15640 and 17860 kHz. NHK World Radio Japan's Bengali transmission will be heard between 13 to 1345 UTC on 11685 kHz. And Hindi transmission can be heard between 14:30 to 15:15 UTC on 15745 kHz and between 0100 to 0130 UTC on 11590 kHz. Sri Lanka Broadcasting Corporation in Sinhala with English and Tamil announcements can be heard on 11750 kHz between 16:30 to 18:32 our UTC on Saturday to Tuesday only. SLBC English transmission is now irregular from 0 to 30 UTC on 11905 kHz. PCJ Radio International from Taiwan, which is transmitting via Trincomalee relay station of Sri Lanka, will be using 13655 kHz between 12:30 to 13:30 UTC for their Sunday only transmission, which has become very popular among listeners these days. Feva Radio will now use Trincomalee relay station for transmitting to India using 9720 kHz between 13:30 to 14 hour UTC. That's give the DXers to QSL Feva Radio again, which for past few years stopped issuing QSL. And here is the Vatican Radio A14 schedule for English and South Asian language transmissions targeting this area. 0040 to 02 hour UTC on 11730 kHz and 15470 kHz. And the same will be repeated between 0200 to 0350 UTC on 15460 kHz. Again in evening between 14:30 to 15:50, Vatican Radio can be heard in South Asia on 11850 and 15110 kHz. Vatican Radio's DRM transmission in English can be heard between 15:30 to 15:50 UTC on 17500 kHz. Radio Romania International has resumed its DRM transmission in English for India during A14 season. RRI English language broadcast beaming to India can be heard between 0300 to 0400 UTC on 825 kHz in analog mode and 15220 kHz in DRM mode. Adventist World Radio in English can be heard in South Asia in the following timings and frequency: 1530 to 16 hour UTC on 15670 kHz from Saturday to Wednesday, 16 to 1630 UTC on 11995 and 11865 kHz on weekdays, 1630 to 17 hour UTC on 15360 kHz on Monday, Wednesday and Fridays. And friends, with this I would like to conclude this edition of DX Report from India, and I hope you liked it. For correct reception reports for this edition of IDXR, we will be issuing our special 2nd anniversary smallest QSLs, which will be world's smallest QSLs in size till today. Please send your reception reports and feedbacks to Indian DX Report, care of Prithviraj Purkayastha, Poob Bengal Pukhuri, by Lane 4, Jorhat 785001, Assam, India. Or you can send your comments and feedbacks to indiandxreport@gmail.com. So friends, until next time, it's goodbye and 73s from Assam.
Well, thank you very much, Prithviraj. And regarding that report about the Voice of Russia ending its shortwave service, we have varying reports and conflicting reports from various sources, including the Voice of Russia itself, as to whether those broadcasts are ending on April 1st or April 30th, and also as to whether the shortwave broadcasts will be ending or shortwave and medium wave will both be ending on one of those dates. All right, let's give you now some information. Today, as you know, is the beginning of the A14 broadcast season, March 30th, and that means a lot of stations are changing schedules around the world. We want to give you the new schedule for Wavescan from WRMI in Okeechobee, Florida, for the A14 season beginning March 30th. You can hear Wavescan each week at the following days and times, and these days and times are UTC. Monday at 0300, 1100, and 1315 UTC. All of these, by the way, are on 9,955 kilohertz, 9955 kilohertz, and all of them are on the southern beam of WRMI, the 160-degree beam towards the Caribbean and South America, except for the Monday 1315 UTC broadcast, which is on the north beam, going towards the west coast of North America. Let's continue now with Tuesday, 0330 UTC, Wednesday, midnight and 1330, Friday at 0315 and 1330 UTC, Saturday at 1100 and 2230, and Sunday at 0200 UTC. All of these transmissions from WRMI Okeechobee on 9955 kilohertz. And we end today's Wavescan with some music from Peru. This is music from Susana Baca, and she is a Peruvian folk singer who performs particularly Afro-Peruvian music from Peru of African descent. We thank you very much for listening to Wavescan, the International DX program from Adventist World Radio, researched and written each week by Dr. Adrian Peterson in Indianapolis, Indiana. Next week on this program, the Titanic anniversary, wireless to the rescue, shipping disasters before the Titanic, also a tribute to shortwave WYFR, Part 9, on the air with WNYW, Radio New York Worldwide, and our Japan DX report. A reminder that we have 2 QSL cards available for your reception reports on this program, one from Adventist World Radio, another from WRMI. You can send your reception reports to Wavescan, Box 29235, Indianapolis, Indiana, 46229 USA. That's Wavescan, Box 29235, Indianapolis, Indiana, 46229 USA. We also like to hear from you by email. You can write to wavescan@awr.org. That's wavescan@awr.org. I'm Jeff White at the studios of WRMI in Miami. Until next time, good listening, everyone.
Pero para María no hay mediodía, pero para María ninguna luna. Alza su copa roja sobre las aguas. María no tiene tiempo, María Lando, de alzar los ojos. María de alzar los ojos, María Lando, rotos de sueño. María rotos de sueño, María Lando, de andar sufriendo. María de andar sufriendo, María Lando, solo trabaja. María solo trabaja, solo trabaja, solo trabaja. María solo trabaja y su trabajo es ajeno. Pero para María no hay mediodía, pero para María ninguna luna. Alza su copa roja sobre las aguas. María no tiene tiempo, María Lando, de alzar los ojos. María de alzar los ojos, María Lando, rotos de sueño. María rotos de sueño, María Lando, de andar sufriendo. María de andar sufriendo, María Lando, solo trabaja. María solo trabaja, solo trabaja, solo trabaja. María solo trabaja y su trabajo es ajeno. María Lando solo trabaja. María Lando solo trabaja. María Lando solo trabaja. María Lando solo trabaja y su trabajo es ajeno.